Welcome to Crosscut Talks. I'm Paris Jackson, the host of Crosscut Now on KCTS 9 and the host for this podcast. Today we're listening into a deep dive into the technology industry's midlife crisis. It's a conversation with Washington Post writer Will Oremus and journalist Lizzie O'Leary at the Crosscut Ideas Festival in Seattle. Oremus and O'Leary explore the metaphor of midlife crisis, where Oremus suggests these now middle-aged big tech companies are feeling old, attacked by lawmakers with regulations, and no longer loved by their users. In this new chapter for tech giants, companies like Microsoft, Google, and Facebook are cutting back by laying off workers in an effort to slim down and stay relevant. Oremus says each major company is grappling with this question: now what? How do they keep growing and remain dominant? The two revisit what made these tech giants powerful, the tactics they used to get there, and how backlash started nearly 10 years ago. As artificial intelligence provides the current wow factor in technology, there are new disruptors complicating the technology ecosystem, presenting opportunities and threats to consider. I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation. Please share your feedback on the podcast with us by sending it to talks@crosscut.com. Now let's get into it.
Hello, and welcome to the Crosscut Festival. My name is Lizzie O'Leary, and I am the host of the Slate podcast, What Next TBD, which is a show about tech, power, and how the future will be determined. And today, we're going to talk about what we're calling Big Tech's midlife crisis. I am joined by Will Oremus, a friend and technology writer for the Washington Post, who is definitely the kind of person I want to interrogate these questions with. Will, thank you so much for joining me.
Lizzie, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
So I actually want to start by just playing with this phrase, this big tech's midlife crisis idea. Do you think it's accurate to say big tech is having a midlife crisis?
Yeah, I think you could say that. I mean, look, in a midlife crisis, you're supposed to go out and buy shiny new toys, right? I don't know if they're really at that stage, but they're definitely trying to recapture the dynamism of their youth, and they're feeling like a little old and sclerotic. They're getting attacked by lawmakers. They're kind of starting to be hated by people instead of loved by people. They're huge. They've been making money forever. They're fat and happy, or they should be, but they are not making it as fast as they want to. So now they're laying people off left and right. They're trying to cut back, trying to get back to being those lean, mean disruption machines that they were in their youth.
Yeah, what is the company equivalent of buying a sports car or having an inappropriate relationship? Is it renaming your company Meta and then staggering around a little bit, trying to figure out what that means?
I think it has to be that. I think what else could it be? I mean, there's Microsoft is out there buying Activision, a gaming company. I mean, they're all trying to stay relevant, and then Google is struggling to keep up with the new kids on the AI block, and so yeah, I mean, I think they're all in different ways grappling with the fact that they got huge, they became the kings of the world, they're dominant, and it's like now what? Like, how do you keep growing from there? And how do you not become the thing that you set out to disrupt in the first place? I mean, Google, Facebook, they started out not wanting to be IBM or Microsoft or Yahoo, right. And now I think they're there.
Okay, well, before we get into the kind of the arc of where they are right now, I actually want to explain to people that the reason they can see the microphones is that you and I are also taping my podcast where we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. And I think I want to look at this idea of a company and industry life cycle. Like if we're using the midlife crisis analogy, the youth or maybe the successful young adulthood, what do you think propelled the big tech companies to that place? Was it just low interest rates? Was it venture capital money? Like, what was the thing that made them such powerful 25-year-olds?
I mean, I think on some level it's easy to forget, but they built really good stuff, right? Like Google is kind of an awesome tool. Google Search is a great tool. Google Translate is amazing. Google Maps is great. Facebook was even was great in some ways. It's hard to remember, but it connected us with our networks, our friends and family, in a way that wasn't really possible before, unless you were really meticulous about maintaining email distribution lists or that kind of thing. Apple made personal technology simpler and easier, and the stuff that just worked. So they built great stuff, honestly. And I think that they deserve
Do you think we forget
credit for that
now?
I tend to forget it because I focus on all their flaws. I focus on all the ways in which they make our lives worse, or in which they provide end runs around institutions or norms that were actually really important, it turns out. But I think they built really great tools, and then came the issue of how do you make money from it. And for a while, they were just growing so fast that they didn't have to press really hard on the money making levers.
Well, and they were subsidized. I mean, some of these companies, but then also the smaller ones, the Ubers of the world, were subsidized by venture capitalists, hoping for a spectacular return.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. I mean, Uber and Lyft on some level, yeah, it was like a seamless experience to be able to open your phone and have a car show up. But on some level, they were sort of like arbitrage, right? Like they were, as you suggested, they were taking VC money and using that to artificially discount the price of hailing a ride from what taxis were able to do. And, we've seen over the years, like Uber and Lyft are now dominant, but nobody loves Uber or Lyft anymore. It turns out that most of what they were doing was just using cheaper labor, not having to pay benefits because they didn't have real employees, and just undercutting the existing businesses that were out there until they could become dominant. And now they become the thing that we don't like, the way we used to not like having to hail a taxi.
You alluded to this a little bit, but you talked about the layoffs. I wonder where you see kind of the place where things started to sour. Is it public opinion shifting, or interest rates going up? Like, where did this inflection point start to come? Because now if we're talking about a midlife crisis, there was something slightly preceding that. And I kind of wonder where you put that in this timeline.
So I wrote a piece for Slate in 2017 about the rise of the phrase big tech. That was a sign of trouble, I said at the time, because when you start getting labeled big, that means that people are worried about you, or they fear you. They don't love you anymore. It goes back to big Teddy Roosevelt and big business as a prelude to his trust busting campaign. FDR and taking on the big banks. Once you're called big, you're in trouble. And so I think that was around the mid 2010s when it started to become clear that these these fun, quirky startups that were going to not be evil in Google's case, or make things that just work, or think different in Apple's case, that they were actually the new incumbents, and that they were going to wield their power in ways that weren't necessarily good for everybody else. And so then that's when you started to see the backlash and the regulatory scrutiny, and journalists. I mean, the tech press had been really laudatory of these companies, almost like boosterism in a lot of cases, from maybe 2010 to 2015, and then started to apply a different lens, which is like, okay, Facebook was moving fast and breaking things. What is it exactly that's getting broken here? And were we really okay with that? And looking for all the ways in which they're sort of like screwing up society instead of making it better.
I think there's also a funny thing where the pandemic maybe gave some of these companies like a little extra runway that they might not have had otherwise. But sort of as we started to go into some of the strongest COVID-19 restrictions, we were supposed to get kind of anti-big tech bills in Congress. We were supposed to see public opinion shift even more strongly, and then the world stopped. I feel like maybe the pandemic gave these companies a little extra lifeline.
I think that's a great point, Lizzie. I think you're right. It did. And we saw that, and maybe they would have been starting to plateau in 2019, 2020. And instead, they had this new surge because everybody had to be online all the time. Not everybody, but white collar workers were online all the time, and people had to socialize online, and people watched a lot of videos online, and so there was this second this second wind that they got, and then as the restrictions eased, we saw, all of them together, their growth leveled off or even reversed in some cases. Last year, Meta, the Facebook parent Meta, Facebook for the first time, I guess, lost users. And that was, a landmark, I think. And so I don't actually think that the current round of layoffs, I don't think that that's the turning point in the history of big tech. I think it's a combination of things that you've mentioned. I think it's the interest rates. It's the end of the pandemic. I think it's sort of a correction rather than a 180 reversal in the history of these companies.
We are going to open up for our audience questions later in the conversation. But one thing I want to explore with you a little bit is, you have spent a lot of time delving into some of these companies' attempts to stay relevant. I think about a story that you wrote about Facebook's Horizon Worlds, and actually a conversation you and I had about like a child on there who you encountered when you went into the metaverse. Can you chart out what the various big tech companies have been trying over the past year or two? Like, where are they trying to get a foothold if we're saying the era of explosive growth is over?
Yeah, that goes back to the idea that these companies were founded and built on the idea that they would always be on the cutting edge, that they would be building the new thing. And so once, Facebook as a social network was mature, once Google search was mature, they went looking for what's next, right? What can we build next? What can we be at the forefront of next? How can we expand our empire and keep it growing? And so they've always been on the lookout for that stuff. And Facebook has been among the savviest. They bought Instagram way back before anybody, almost anybody saw that Instagram could be a threat to Facebook. They bought it for what at the time seemed like a lot of money. I think it was like, $1 billion or something, and now seems tiny given what Instagram has become. They bought WhatsApp before a lot of people realized that like group messaging was a big part of tech's future, and that WhatsApp was becoming really almost the dominant online communication means in many different countries around the world, although not the US. So now, it's a continuation of that, but they're struggling to find the hits, right? Like they keep buying, like Facebook bought Oculus and the VR company, and yeah, they're now the leading VR company, but does anybody really want VR? It's still not clear after all the time and money that's been poured into it. And meanwhile, TikTok has come along, and that's the new Facebook, really. That's where people are spending their time. And Facebook hasn't been able to come up with an answer to that, except let's see if we can kind of like quietly build this idea that TikTok is this evil Chinese company and get them regulated. Or
do you see Facebook behind that push?
Facebook, I'm sure Facebook will deny it. They'll say that they don't want to see TikTok banned necessarily. But yeah, one of my colleagues did a story about how Facebook had been sort of, secretly funding these AstroTurf local news campaigns to emphasize the dangers of TikTok challenges and how our kids were in danger. And, the tech companies, for the most part, their lobbies have not gone to bat for TikTok, with TikTok under all the scrutiny that it's under right now. So they're really playing, they're playing defense. And it's actually kind of hard to remember the last time one of those big tech giants came up with a new product that was really like the hot new thing. I think it's been a while.
Yeah. Otherwise they just buy small companies, right? And kind of incorporate them into the mothership.
Yeah, and that has worked to an extent. But like Google, if you think back to 2014 maybe, Google was a moonshot factory, right? It was like going to cure cancer and like send have internet satellites in space. I don't even remember all the details. It was doing everything. It was like the company that was going to save the world. And And almost none of that stuff panned out. I mean, it's not to say that they haven't made any progress on any of those problems, but they certainly haven't reached the moon on any of them. And so this idea that they could just continually keep inventing the future, I think, that has proven not to really be the case.
So I want to dig in on some of those ideas about the future and sort of figure out where we're going, we writ large. I want to talk about social media. You have mentioned TikTok. I know also that you have been spending a lot of time on Blue Sky, which is a new...
Do not tell my editors that I've been spending a lot of time on Blue Sky.
You have not been spending any time on Blue Sky. You are 100% reporting all the time. Come on, man. This is your job.
I'm nodding solemnly.
I want to talk about decentralized social media. Like, what is that? Why should I care?
Yeah, so at the same time that the tech giants are trying to sell us on their new versions of the future, people are increasingly interested in someone else's idea of what the future should look like. Whether that's TikTok, whether that's I assume we'll get into like ChatGPT.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about AI.
And one of the I don't know that Twitter was ever quite big tech. It wanted to be big tech, but it certainly was.
I would say big tech in terms of the sort of like public attention it captured, but was always this kind of like weird small company.
Yeah. And so Twitter, was never able to like hit it big with the mainstream the way Facebook did. And so it was always in financial peril. And finally it gets bought by Elon Musk. And all of a sudden, a lot of people, I mean, some people on the right are like really excited about this and feel great about it. A lot of the people who love Twitter are like, wow, this sucks now. Like, what are we going to do instead? And so one of the ideas that kind of like came a little out of left field was this idea of decentralized social media, where a company will build a protocol for people to like send messages to their followers and send DMs and whatever else, and then other developers can come in and build the different layers on that. They can build their own server and do their own content moderation. They can build their own apps for a different interfaces for using this.
You're
this
describing
network.
The architecture of Mastodon, basically.
Yeah, so Mastodon was the first to do it, and for a long time it didn't get any traction because it's like kind of clunky and wonky and like hard to understand, and so it was like sort of dead. But there was like enough people to keep it going. And then when Musk took over Twitter, all of a sudden people are looking for a backup, right? And so people flocked to Mastodon. Now, a lot of people flocked right back away from Mastodon when they figured out how slow it is, and even the first thing you have to do is like figure out what server you're going to join. Well, what the hell does that mean, right? But now Jack Dorsey had also been interested in this idea of decentralized social media. He funded a startup called Blue Sky that built its own version that so far seems much less wonky, you can just use it like Twitter, even though it has this decentralized underpinning, and people are loving it so far. Like people are thrilled to be on there. They're like, this is what Twitter felt like 10 or 15 years ago, like when it was actually fun. There's like vibes of like Tumblr of 10 or 15 years ago. And so, I don't know that it's going to take off. It has a lot of problems to solve between now and ever becoming mainstream. But I think it just shows that people are looking for something different, and maybe this decentralized way of doing it is kind of a reaction to big tech. It's a reaction to the idea that one company should be the decider of how we all interact online, or what we can say and what we can't say, or what features are going to be rolled out.
I want to interrogate that a little bit, though, because I think one of the things that is maybe appealing about a Twitter or what have you is the chance to encounter people who you wouldn't encounter in real life, right? Who wouldn't be the people you would choose necessarily to follow. And I wonder if decentralization kind of silos people into their own camps.
I think there's a chance of that. I mean, I think that the bigger thing that might silo people into their own camps is just if there's not one dominant network. Facebook is losing that status rapidly. TikTok is kind of on its way to it, but it's not really an omnibus social media site like Facebook was, where you can do everything with all your friends. If there's not really one, social network for your friends and family like there was with Facebook, if there's not just one real-time feed of sort of news and information and opinions and jokes like Twitter, then yeah, I think we could start to get some siloing. We've already seen that on the right with True Social and Parler and Getter and Gab. I can't even remember all the names of them. There's clearly appetite for some siloing, and maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's the thing. I think the decentralization isn't the biggest obstacle to like chance encounters, because with these protocols, the whole point is like you can be on one server, Lizzie, and I can be on a different server, and we can still see each other's tweets or toots or skeets,
whatever we're calling them.
Yes. But yeah, no, I do think that like, if to the extent that the era of like one dominant platform may be changing, ending, whatever, maybe there will be more siloing where people sort themselves out onto the platform that seems to reflect their values or their vibes.
Do you think, I'm thinking back to when I joined Twitter, which was 2009, and the kind of internet content that I interacted with then, but also the Facebook of that era and other social networks, there was a naivete, maybe a hope, a belief that communicating and connecting was something that was a force for good. And I wonder if we've soured on that.
Oh yeah, I've soured on it, haven't you?
I mean, yes, but I'm asking you in a rhetorical way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was the dream for big tech was that these companies could be forces for good and make crap tons of money. And like, and I think we're finding out that they're like big tech can't have it all. They if they want to make crap tons of money, and they clearly that we've seen time after time that that's their number one imperative when it comes down to it. They're going to be making choices all the time that make them not a force for good. And the idea that just inherently somehow connecting people would result, just in good outcomes it was always naive. And, I think that there were critics from early on, especially women of color, people who experienced like the downsides, the dark sides of this connection earlier than the white men who were building it and in charge of it. There are great things about people all around the world being able to instantly say anything to anybody, and there are some pretty horrible things about it. And so I think some of these new ventures are an attempt to like sort that out. Like, is there a way that we can feel connected to other people, but not have just not have a realm like Facebook where it's full of like grifters trying to get our clicks, or a realm like Twitter where it's like where the people who are like the most vitriolic or hateful or bigoted are the ones who are going to get huge followings, and we have these public fights between factions.
You've teed up my question about Elon Musk so beautifully. Because if we're doing a tech conversation, I have to talk about Elon. I'm sorry, that's just how it goes. Do you think, and I recognize that this is a provocative question, but what has happened with Twitter over the past year, is that enough to drive a stake into the heart of the kind of single tech genius trope?
It should be. I don't think it will be, no. But I mean,
why do we love this idea? Why is this idea so pervasive and yet so wrong?
I would have to defer to like evolutionary psychologists or literature or sociologists, somebody, but like throughout history, we've wanted heroes. And in the past 30 to 40 years, this new archetype of hero of like the tech genius, twiddling knobs in a Silicon Valley garage and changing the world has been one of the types of heroes that we look for. And Steve Jobs and, Page and Brin and at Google and Elon Musk with Tesla and SpaceX. And it was always a myth, right? I mean, it was not to say that there weren't smart people doing innovative things in garages. Clearly there were, and clearly the things they built have changed the world. But the idea that it was their singular genius that made it happen was always a myth. I mean, it was always a combination of like right place at the right time, right idea at the right time, the right connections. In Musk's case, he's kind of erased the fact that he didn't actually start Tesla. It was already going, and then he came in with a pile of money and kind of forced out the guys who started it. And then we've got stuff like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, where she was like clearly playing into that mythology. She was like the female Steve Jobs, right down to the turtlenecks, and she turned out to be a total fraud. And I think it would do us all good to bear in mind that just because someone is very smart and successful in the tech industry doesn't mean that they're good. Often the most successful ones are the most brutal, cutthroat ones. And I think Jobs and Musk fit into that category.
So let's talk about what the next thing is. Silicon Valley is always looking for the hot new thing. And I feel like the last couple of years, there have been some murmurings and then some fails. What have you seen gain speed and maybe stall out? And what are you excited by?
Yeah, and we talked at the beginning about whether big tech's buying shiny new toys. We actually haven't seen as much of that. And I think it's partly, sorry, this is a bit of a digression, but there's this,
Go for it.
We alluded earlier to, the regulatory scrutiny of the tech giants and the growing momentum before and during the pandemic to pass antitrust legislation, maybe break up big tech. Elizabeth Warren made this a centerpiece for her presidential campaign. And that has all kind of stalled out on the legislative front. And the tech lobby sort of won. I mean, they spent really big to kill this stuff, and they succeeded, at least for now and for the foreseeable future.
On the Hill, I would say they've succeeded. I'm not sure they've succeeded where the FTC is concerned.
That's right. Yes. So the FTC is extremely aggressive under Lina Khan, and there are changes afoot in terms of administrative regulation. But I think there's also this like underrated aspect of it, which is just all the scrutiny about antitrust really constrained the companies. I think there were a lot of huge, splashy purchases they would have loved to make and didn't make because they knew it would further the chance of them getting, becoming the subject of trust busting. And so I think there actually has been a significant constraint on the companies just from the idea that antitrust is a real thing now, and just from the idea that wielding your dominance to crush rivals might get you in trouble, even if it hasn't resulted in new laws. So all of that is to say that instead of being able to buy the shiny new thing, in recent years they've been, the tech industry has been looking, well, can we build the next thing? And Facebook with the metaverse, there was crypto, which actually didn't come from big tech per se. I mean, it was a little more grassroots. But crypto and Web3, there was a time, I think just like 2 years ago, when like everybody said that Web3 was, everybody in tech was trying to sell us that Web3 was the future.
Means.
And it didn't really, and it never really meant anything except like, let's find new ways to scam people out of money and get rich. And I think to the credit of like critics and society and the media, like we didn't get fooled again in a way. I mean, we did, some people did, a lot of people lost their shirts, but I think that we as a society are more ready now when tech is trying to sell us on this is the new thing, to say, well, wait a minute, are you sure? Like, is this actually going to make things better, or is it just going to make you money? So that has kind of died down, and it was sort of a house of cards all along. Now we've got AI, and I think that's a little different because this is a technology that's, there's a there. There's like real stuff behind it. It's been percolating for decades. And now we're at this point with the development of large language models where AI is suddenly doing stuff that's making people go, holy crap. And that's what tech hasn't had for so long. Like for so many years, tech hasn't had that thing that makes people go, wow, like I can't believe it can do that. And that's what ChatGPT did when it came out in November.
So I think this is a great moment to sort of take stock of what AI as we see it now can do. And then maybe where the people who own or license these tools think about where they're going, right? Like you and I as consumers can mess around on ChatGPT and have it do web searches and have it write copy or answer questions. But I don't think that Microsoft is plunking a $10 billion investment into OpenAI for you and me. What's the game plan?
I think one of the interesting things about the tech industry is that they've always been willing to figure out the money game plan later. They kind of trust that if they can just get us all hooked on something, that the money will come. And that, and I think there's truth to that. It does allow them to focus on building cool stuff first and then worry about the business later. The thing is, inevitably, they're going to have to worry about the business. And it's really easy when ChatGPT is being offered for free and VC money is going into all these AI startups and all the big tech companies are subsidizing it, to feel like, oh, this is free, it's great, there's no downside. And we have to remember that there is, as you said, there is going to be a need to monetize it. They're gonna find a way to use these tools to separate us from our money. And so, we should be on the lookout for that. We shouldn't be under the illusion that this stuff won't come with costs of its own.
So to train a large language model, whether it's ChatGPT or something else, you need a tremendous amount of data, right, for the AI to learn from. And you also need a tremendous amount of computing power, which is expensive. And so this is another place where I guess I start to wonder if those two things mean that AI is concentrated in the hands of the companies that can pay for those things.
Yeah, I think at least in the short term, the companies that are going to benefit the most financially are the ones that have the giant, clouds and all the computing power that the models have to be trained on and that the models run on. And so I think, in a sense, even though the narrative is, oh, look, this upstart OpenAI came along with ChatGPT, and there's other upstarts with like Midjourney and Stability AI and Anthropic, they're coming along and disrupting the big tech companies. And I think that's real. I think the big tech companies are worried about losing users to these upstarts, but on some level, like, they're so entrenched now, like nobody else has the computing power. And in fact, when OpenAI, they started out wanting to be this nonprofit that was going to be about building AI responsibly, and that was their whole mission statement. And then they found that in order to do like the stuff they wanted to do, they needed like really expensive computers. And so they had to go to Microsoft and be like, hey, want to invest in us because we need your computers. And so that's how Microsoft got its in with OpenAI. And then over the years, OpenAI has found that it found, or decided, I don't know how you want to put it, but like, they're no longer just a nonprofit. Like, they had to be able to sell investors on the idea that they'll be able to make 10x returns on their money or more. And so they started this for-profit subsidiary, which is this really weird, like only in Silicon Valley structure. And so yeah, it requires big money, it requires big computing power. And then maybe you were going to mention this. The other thing about that training process, where you train these models on like everything that's ever been written on Reddit and Tumblr and every patent that's ever been filed in the world, is that you end up with like these data sets that are full of all the worst biases on the internet. And now like people are looking to ChatGPT to answer their questions about the world, or develop their lesson plans or trip itineraries, or to write essays, or to write online content. I'm finishing the story. I shouldn't say too much, but about like all the AI content that's already out there on the web. And so, and those biases are going to get embedded in that content. And the fact that there's only a few companies, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, there's only a few companies building these giant models that are underpinning all this whole AI language and image revolution, means that these same few models and their biases are going to pervade the online world with, I think, consequences that we haven't really grappled with yet.
And we are already seeing, I think many of the pioneers of AI kind of wringing their hands about this, which is a whole other conversation. Yeah, maybe after they've already cashed out. I don't know. It's a very complicated thing. I'm actually going to delve into some of our audience questions because we have a lot and they're very good. This is one from Gary. Do you see any new tech companies coming that could upend or pass some of these big tech giants?
I think they are really hard to upend or pass. And again, it's case by case. I think Facebook is vulnerable in a way right now that Google and Apple are not, in a way that Microsoft is not at this moment. But this is not like, there was this idea in maybe, I don't know, maybe after the Microsoft antitrust case, from then until maybe 2010 or 2015 or so, there was this idea that the internet was so dynamic that like nobody really had a defensible moat, that any time a startup could come along and overturn the industry, you know, they could do to Google and Amazon what Facebook did to MySpace, or what Google did to you know, Alta Vista and Yahoo. Yeah. And so, and I think that that's no longer the case. I mean, these companies are so huge and so powerful that they have their fingers in so many pots, and they own so many of the pipes that all the upstarts have to use, that they really are somewhat impregnable in at least the medium term. As far as companies, I think we've touched on really the two companies that have come along and been even able to make the giants nervous. And that's TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, and it's ChatGPT, which is owned by OpenAI. But you know, OpenAI is like completely in bed with Microsoft already. So and ByteDance is a tech giant of its own. I mean, it's a massive company. So you know, I think that the ability for an upstart to come along and change everything is not what it used to be.
I'm jumping around a bit in the questions, but you mentioned TikTok, and this question I find really interesting. This is from Sandy saying, my teen told me that she wouldn't care if social media went away. She uses TikTok and Instagram a lot, so I find it interesting that she feels that way. What do you think about that dichotomy? And I want to note that I literally just talked to a teen last week for a show about this. I feel like there's suddenly teenagers saying, like, I'm not sure I want to do this.
Good for them. Yeah. I mean, you know, our generation, Lizzie, like got addicted to Facebook and whatever else without really considering what the downsides might be. Like, what are we not doing when we're spending 2 hours a day scrolling through social media feeds, and what are we losing there? And I think there's like some signs of hope that the younger generation is, you know, maybe more thoughtful about that. I have also seen teens who are really ambivalent about their use of TikTok. And I love it. I can't live without it, but also it kind of scares me that I can't live without it. And maybe that's not a good thing. And there are teens who don't use, you know, who don't use social media intentionally, or who try to limit their time on social media. So, you know, I think there, you know, to some degree, like shifting, like better understanding, shifting norms can help. But ultimately, like these social media tools, like these tech tools, tap into our psychology on a sort of basic level that's really hard to fight. And you know, you can see it. Elon Musk is a great example. Like, I'm not saying Elon Musk was a good guy even before he got Twitter pilled, but like, you know, he's clearly a Twitter addict. Like he can't stop. He can't stop. And it's self-destructive. I mean, it might take down his whole business empire at this point, and he cannot stop posting or caring about what other people post, because it's really tapping into like our deepest fears and needs and desires. So I'm not super optimistic that like future generations will be able to handle this.
To follow on that, though, there are multiple state legislatures, Utah, Arkansas, that have some type of, you know, social media, if not outright ban, but you can only use it with, you know, parental consent. There is a bill, I believe Brian Schatz introduced a bill in the Senate that would do some similar things. Do you think we're moving toward a place where the conversation about teens and the kind of online world becomes a more heavily regulated one? Yeah,
absolutely. We're moving that direction. And it's just a question of like how far, and then how smart or how dumb, right? Like, you know, the EU has really been, I think people in the US still don't appreciate the extent to which the EU has changed the landscape of the internet with its much more aggressive approach to regulation. And some of their regulations have backfired, and some of them have front fired. Some of them have worked, you know, maybe been good. And you know, in the US, we can't really do much at a federal level because our government is broken at that level. And then at the state level, I mean, things are so partisan that you get one state passing a blue state passing a social media law that's like the complete opposite of what a red state is doing, right? Like blue states are trying to say like, well, you know, we're not going to let social media algorithms amplify hate. And then, you know, the red state is saying, well, we're not going to let them stop hate. You know, we're going to require them to carry hate and amplify hate on their social networks. And so, you know, I think it's going to be a mess for a while. I mean, you look at some of these state regulations, I think that some of them are really misguided. Some of them are going to be overturned by the courts, but maybe slowly, eventually, gradually, we're going to figure out as a society and as societies how to like rein in a little bit the unchecked power of these giant platforms.
We have another question about AI. And this is kind of provocative. Like all the companies racing to make AI products, what does one of them, quote unquote, winning look like?
That's an interesting question. I mean, you know, on the most basic level, I mean, OpenAI is winning because ChatGPT is the one that's become a household name. Like if you ask, you know, your coworker or your family member, you know, what's Bard or what's Bing or what's Anthropic, you know, you're going to get a blank stare probably, but maybe not for Bing, but they'll still think of the search engine. ChatGPT, we found in giving away secrets again, we found in like our headline tests that the term ChatGPT actually does better than AI. Like people recognize that the average reader gets that like ChatGPT is a thing. They know what that means. Interested in it. So that's one sign of winning. I think, again, I think there's a sense in which the companies with the huge server clouds are winning because that, you know, for all the reasons we talked about. And I think there's a lot that's still up in the air. I mean, there are real questions about whether the company that owns the underlying model, you know, how much rent can they extract from all the other companies that are going to be building on those models and making the user interfaces and the tooling systems. You know, who's going to be, this is really, I mean, sadly, like one story of the history of big tech has been like, you know, who's going to be the new landlords? Who's going to be the ones who get to just cash the rent, you know, cash the rent checks every month? And who are the ones who are going to have to pay the rent?
Well, I mean, to that end, Reddit, this is very dorky, but Reddit just started or just said it's going to start charging for use of its API, basically like the massive store of Reddit data that these companies are training their large language models on because they've been doing it for free. And Reddit said like, no, thank you. If you're going to train your models, you got to pay us. Yeah,
I mean, and I don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to Reddit, but like, wouldn't it be? It's funny that it's almost like a radical idea that the people who actually produced all the language online, like us, the users, you know, might have any. You know, what if we were the rent collectors somehow? Like, what if the fact that they had to use our Reddit posts and our tweets and skeets, you know, to train their models meant that we would somehow benefit? I don't think that's going to happen because it's just not the way our society works. But there is this battle. I mean, it is a live issue. Like who owns the data, and what do they get in return for people using the data? Who owns the models? What do they get when people use the models? All that kind of stuff, I think, is up in the air and being fought over.
This is a simple question. What about Amazon? Where do they fit into this? Good question.
Yeah, a simple but a good one. I mean, you know, Amazon's game plan from the start was to be the everything store, and so they're like most of these tech giants. I mean, you know, they what they publicly sell is we're going to make your life easier and better, and what they sort of like privately sell is like we're going to dominate the world, right? We're going to make it so that everybody has to use our product, and Amazon has succeeded to an incredible degree in making it so that just like when you need to buy stuff, you go to Amazon. It doesn't even matter what the stuff is. Yeah. But again, it was done partly, as you said, it was done partly by losing money for decades. Like if you can lose money, you know, 10 years straight, and like have your investors keep sending your stock up because you're amassing power while you're losing money. I mean, what chance did the incumbents stand against a company like, you know, your Barnes and Noble or your, you know, whatever, a retail chain that's in shopping malls, and you have to make money, and you're facing a competitor that can lose money for as long as it wants, as long as they're putting you out of business. I mean, it's just, and they've done it, and now they're huge, they're dominant. I mean, I think. Let me see what I can say about this. I think that it's worth considering, even if the giants, you know, even if the tech giants are in a down moment right now, even if they're laying people off, even if they seem a little less unshakable than maybe they did a couple of years ago, is it worth as a society just looking at the incentives that drove them to get so big in the first place? Is there any way we could we could sort of disincentivize companies driving, having as a business model, we're going to drive everybody else out of business and then jack up the rent and become kings of the world. Like, could we somehow make that cycle less likely?
Who is the we in that sentence, though? Because you mentioned Elizabeth Warren earlier, right? That was like a centerpiece of her primary platform. Did not go that far, though she is still pushing for this in the Senate. Is it the upstart Amazon labor union, which has had some victories, notably in the JFK 8 warehouse in Staten Island, but then not in its subsequent ones? Or is it us, right? Is it the consumer, where it's really easy for me when I know that we're out of baby wipes for me to just go blip, 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 baby wipes, and not walk down the street to the drugstore? Like, I guess I wonder, like, how does that collective will get harnessed?
I think it's probably everything. I mean, you look at like, I don't think individual actions alone are gonna make all the change. I think incentives are more powerful than the ability of the consumer to change society. But that's certainly a part of it. I mean, the fact that people kind of hate Facebook now because of the bad things about Facebook, that makes a difference, right? That does matter. Yeah. I think that reckoning with the power that these companies amassed and sort of the good that they've done and the damage that they've done, and like, how can we steer things more toward the good and away from the damage, and how can we make sure that there's still room for upstarts and innovation? It's a slow, messy process. I'll leave it one thought about that is that, like, all of those other bigs, like the big business, the big banks, big tobacco, big pharma, they've all been regulated over the years, but in every case, it took a long time. It took a lot of change in attitudes. It took regulation, and it never happens quickly. And they still haven't gone away. None of them have gone away. I don't think big tech is going away. I do think there's hope that we can manage it a little bit better in the long run. You
brought this to like a beautiful end. So,
I saw the little timer ticking, so I was like, oh, better get some.
Better get like a big wrap-up statement. We are officially out of time. Will Oremus, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for being here.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Lizzie.
That's it for today's episode. Thanks to Will and Lizzie for the talk. This episode of Crosscut Talks was produced by Seth Halloran and engineered by Rusty Bacall and Victoria Ralph. And the event was produced by Jake Newman and Ann O'Dowd. Madeline Happold managed our audience engagement. And you can subscribe to Crosscut Talks wherever you listen. And if you like the show, please review us. We want to know what you think. For the latest political, environmental, and cultural news from the Pacific Northwest, visit crosscut.com. And if you would like to support the work we do at Crosscut, whether it's live events we host or the in-depth reporting we do every day, go to crosscut.com/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to on-demand programming on Seattle's PBS station, KCTS 9. Crosscut Talks is a product of Cascade Public Media. I'm Paris Jackson. We'll be back soon with another conversation.